Hello, and a heartfelt welcome to you all to Beyond the Bias. I'm so deeply grateful you've chosen to spend this time here. The story I want to share with you today isn't just a news clip, it's a symphony of human emotion played out over years. It's a story that lives in the quiet, unrecorded moments, in the space between a heartbeat and a decision, between a cry for help and an answer that becomes a lifetime. It's about the invisible threads that connect us and how sometimes the most broken of those threads can be woven into the strongest bond imaginable. This is the chronicle of police officer Brian Zach and a little girl named Kyla, a story he has lived, breathed, and holds as the defining chapter of his life. So find a comfortable place, open your heart, and let's journey into this remarkable true tale together. The Arizona sun was a relentless, hammering brass bell over Kingman, beginning its slow, blazing descent behind the Hualapai Mountains. For Officer Brian Zach, the day had been a familiar tapestry of small-town patrol, the dull thrum of the engine, the crackle of the radio, the endless ribbon of asphalt. He'd dealt with a shoplifter at the CVS, a barking dog complaint, and had written a ticket to a teenager doing 50. It was normalcy, it was routine, and in police work, routine is a gift. The call that shattered that routine came in just as the day shift was dreaming of dinner and the night shift was still rubbing sleep from its eyes. The dispatcher's voice, usually a model of calm efficiency, was laced with a tension that made Brian sit up straight, his hand instinctively tightening on the wheel. Units respond to 1845 Maple Drive, apartment 3B, for a welfare check. Caller is a neighbor, reports hearing prolonged crying from a child, sounds of a disturbance. Possible 10-52, child involved. 1052, a domestic dispute. The words alone were enough to sour the stomach of any seasoned officer. But child involved, those two words were a cold spike of dread. Brian flicked on his lights and siren, the sudden screaming wail, a violent tear in the fabric of the quiet evening. His mind, trained for this, began running scenarios, protocols, possibilities. But his heart, the part he tried to keep locked away during calls like this, was already aching for the unknown child at the center of the storm. The apartment complex at 1845 Maple was a study in faded beige and weary neglect. Toys bleached by the sun lay forgotten in dusty yards. The air smelled of hot asphalt and fried food. As Brian pulled up, other units were already on scene, their light bars painting the stucco walls in frantic pulses of blue and red. The door to 3B was open. The sounds from within were not of crying now, but of raised, defensive voices. A woman's shrill protestations layered over a man's low, rumbling anger. Brian took a deep breath, the kind that's meant to steady the nerves but never quite does, and crossed the threshold. The scene inside was a chaotic diorama of a life coming apart. The air was thick with the smell of stale cigarettes and unwashed laundry. Two other officers were trying to calm a visibly agitated woman, Kyla's mother. A man, later identified as her boyfriend, stood sullenly by a stained kitchen counter, his arms crossed, radiating a defiant hostility. But Brian's eyes, honed by years of scanning for the vulnerable, swept past the adults, and then he found her. Tucked into the corner of a sagging floral print couch, almost swallowed by a mountain of old blankets and clothes, was a tiny figure. She was so preternaturally still, so utterly silent amidst the shouting, that she seemed like a ghost in her own home. She was clutching something, a stuffed rabbit, its fur matted into dreadlocks, one ear hanging by a thread, one black button eye missing. Her head was bowed, a curtain of fine, wispy hair hiding her face. Everything else in the room, the yelling, the posturing, the procedural ballet of the arrest, faded into a dull buzz. Brian's entire world narrowed to that small, still form on the couch. He held up a hand to the other officers, a silent signal that he slowly, deliberately removed his patrol cap, making himself less authoritative, less intimidating. He knelt on the grimy carpet before her, his utility belt creaking, his large frame folding down to her level. "Hey there," he said, his voice dropping into a register so soft and gentle it was almost a whisper. It was a voice he used for lost kittens and frightened witnesses. "My name's Brian, what's yours?" She didn't look up, she didn't make a she just seemed to shrink deeper into the couch, pulling the ragged bunny closer to her chest. His training told him to assess, to document. His humanity begged him to look away. Gently, so gently it was barely a touch, he reached out and used the tip of his finger to tilt her chin. The air left his lungs in a silent, painful rush. It felt like a physical blow to his chest. Her face was a catastrophic landscape of pain. It was a map of cruelty, meticulously drawn on the most innocent of canvas. A violent purplish-black bruise bloomed around her left eye, so swollen it was nearly shut. A matching, sickening yellow-green bruise surrounded her right. A third angry red mark sat squarely in the center of her forehead. Left, right, and center, he would later recount, the clinical description failing to capture the horror. But the worst of it was the dry, dark blood, tracing the delicate whorls of both her tiny ear. Older bruises, fading into mustard yellow and sickly green, lay beneath the fresh ones, telling a story not of a single incident, but of a sustained campaign of terror. The professional mask he wore, the one made of procedure and detachment, shattered into a million pieces. A white-hot primal fury coiled in his gut, mixed with a devastating, heart-cracking wave of pity. He had to consciously steady his breathing, force his hand not to tremble. Who? How? The questions were a scream in his mind. How could anyone look into the face of such perfect, tiny vulnerability and choose to cause such calculated, brutal pain? But then she opened her one good eye. The left was just a puffy slit, but the right one opened slowly, and she peered at him. And in that single brown eye, he didn't see just the expected fear or the shock of the pain. He saw something else entirely, a quiet, ancient assessment, a tiny, fierce, unextinguishable spark of a person still in there, watching him, judging. Despite the horror etched on her skin, there was a resilience, a spirit that had not been broken. She was, as he would later tell anyone who would listen, still happy-go-lucky deep down, a sun waiting behind the storm clouds. The arrests were made, the readings of rights, the click of handcuffs, the protests and curses fading as the adults were led to waiting squad cars. The apartment fell into a heavy, sterile silence, broken only by the rustle of evidence bags and the low, professional murmur of the other officers. The little girl, he learned from a tossed-aside welfare form, was named Kyla. She was 2 years old. "Okay, Kyla," Brian said, his voice thick with an emotion so vast he had no name for it. "You're safe now, I've got you." He didn't swaddle her in a blanket, didn't treat her like evidence. He simply opened his arms, and after a moment's hesitation, she leaned forward. He gathered her up, her body impossibly small and light against the hard, unforgiving surface of his ballistic vest. She felt like a bird with hollow bones. She didn't make a sound. She just laid her bruised temple against the cool, smooth surface of his badge, her good eye staring blankly ahead. He carried her out of that dark, terrible place, her ragged bunny clutched in her hand, and stepped into the cooling Arizona evening. In that moment, he felt he was carrying the entire world's capacity for both cruelty and compassion in his arms. The drive to the station was a silent pilgrimage. He talked to her softly, a steady, gentle monologue meant to soothe them both. He pointed out big trucks, a dog being walked, the first stars pricking the violet sky. She didn't respond. She just stared out the window, her expression unreadable, her small body tense against the car seat he'd carefully buckled her into. The Kingman Police Department was a universe of harsh fluorescent light and echoing linoleum, a place of business that was inherently hostile to a traumatized child. The sounds were all wrong, the jarring ring of telephones, the clatter of keyboards, the static hiss of the radio dispatcher, the low, bored murmurs from the holding cells. The smell was of stale coffee, industrial cleaner and Brian found a small, spare interview room, slightly removed from the main bullpen. It wasn't much, but it was the best he could do. Paperwork needed to be filled out. A caseworker from the Department of Child Safety had to be summoned. It could take hours. He sat her on a hard, plastic chair, her legs dangling, her small feet not even grazing the floor. She looked impossibly small and lost. The institutional lighting was cruel, making the bruises on her face look even more lurid and painful. His heart ached with a physical pain. What do you do? How do you bridge the chasm between this world and hers? He offered her a juice box from the break room. She took it with a silent, mechanical motion but didn't drink. He tried to make conversation about her bunny. Nothing. He felt a rising panic of helplessness. Then an idea, a lifeline. He pulled out his personal cell phone. "Do you like movies, Kyla?" he asked. She gave a minuscule, almost imperceptible shrug. He scrolled through a streaming service, his thumb hovering until he found it. Wreck-It Ralph. The bright, colorful poster seemed like a beacon from another galaxy. He propped the phone up on the table between them. The vibrant animation lit up the dim room. He pulled up another chair, sitting beside her but not too close, careful not to crowd her, to give her a sense of safety and space. He didn't touch her, he just sat with her. He became a movie narrator. As the story of the misunderstood wrecking villain unfolded, he provided a soft running commentary. "Oh, look at him. He's a big guy, huh? But he's not so bad." He pointed at the screen. "You're adorable," he whispered, pointing at the little glitch. Then he pointed at himself, a small, self-deprecating joke offered to the universe. "I'm adorable, right there." He wasn't sure she was even listening. She was just staring at the bright screen, her expression a blank mask, a fortress. And then it happened, a moment that would redefine every moment that came after it, the moment that would echo through the rest of his life. Slowly, with a gravity that was breathtaking, her small hand crept across the cold, formica tabletop, her fingers, tiny and delicate, brushed against his hand, a cop's hand, calloused, capable of restraining a violent adult, of firing a weapon, of gripping a steering wheel in a high-speed pursuit. Lay completely still. He held his breath, afraid that the slightest movement would break the spell. She didn't pull away. She explored his finger first, then his knuckles, as if mapping a new terrain. Then she took his entire hand, her grip surprisingly firm, and she pulled it into her lap, onto the faded denim of her tiny overalls. And then she just held it, and then she began to pet it. Her tiny fingers started to stroke his skin, softly, rhythmically, tracing the lines on his palm, smoothing over his knuckles. It was a gesture of such profound innate tenderness, such boundless compassion, that it shattered the last of his professional resolve. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at his hand, her head bowed over it, with a fierce concentration. It was as if she was looking past the uniform, past the badge, past the gun on his hip. She was seeing the man underneath. She was seeing the tension he carried from the day, from the job, from the horrific sight of her injuries. And in her infinite, 2-year-old wisdom, this child who had known nothing but pain from the adults in her life, had decided that he was the one who needed comfort, that he was the one who was scared, that his hand needed holding. This victim was ministering to her protector. Tears welled in Brian's eyes, hot and unashamed, and he let them fall. He didn't wipe them away. "It melted my heart right away," he would say later, the words hopelessly inadequate to describe the seismic shift that occurred in that sterile room. In that single, silent, transformative gesture, Kyla wasn't just holding his hand, she was grabbing hold of his soul and claiming it for her own. Hours later, the DCS worker arrived, a woman named Maria with a kind, tired face and a folder full of paperwork. The bureaucratic transfer was made. Forms were signed. Brian watched as Maria gently took Kyla's other hand. Kyla looked back at him over her shoulder, just one quick, unreadable glance, her good eye meeting his before she disappeared around the corner and out of the station. The silence she left behind was louder than any siren. His shift was long over. He drove home through the dark, empty streets of Kingman. The silence in his car was a physical presence. He could still feel the ghost of her small, warm hand petting his. He could see her bruised face every time he closed his eyes against the oncoming headlight. He went through the motions of his evening, the shower that couldn't wash away the feeling, the microwave dinner that tasted like ash, the mindless flicking of the TV remote, but he wasn't really there. His spirit was back in that interview room, watching a cartoon with a little girl who had in the space of a few hours, rewired his entire existence. He slept fitfully, his dreams a chaotic montage of chasing faceless suspects through endless corridors, always just out of reach, and of searching for a lost little girl who called his name from the shadows. He woke before dawn, the first gray light of Sunday morning filtering through his blind. Kyla's face was the first thing in his mind, vivid and painful. The worry was a cold, hard stone in his gut. The system, for all its good intentions, was a vast, impersonal machine. Where was she? Was she in a sterile group home, emergency foster placement with stranger? Was she lying in a dark room, scared and alone? Was she crying for someone, for anyone? The thought was unbearable. He couldn't take it. As soon the clock hit a reasonable hour, he scrambled for the business card the DCS worker had given him. His hand, usually so steady, shook slightly as he dialed the number. It rang and rang. He was about to hang up, his courage failing, when a voice answered. "This is Maria. Maria, hi. This is Officer Brian Zach. We met last night. I brought in the little girl, Kyla." "Oh yes, Officer Zach, how are you?" Her voice was professional but not unkind. I'm okay," he lied. I was just wondering, how is she, how is Kyla doing?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. He could hear the rustle of paper, a keyboard clicking. "She's okay," Maria said, her tone careful. "She's in a temporary placement. She's a quiet little thing. Didn't eat much breakfast, pretty withdrawn." Ryan's heart clenched. He asked a few more questions, his voice tight with a concern that he knew was crossing a line from professional interest to something far deeper, far more personal. Then Maria said something that changed the entire axis of his world. "You know, Officer Zach, she did say something this morning." "She did?" The words came out as a strained whisper. "She did. She pointed to the door and said, 'Big man, movie?'" Brian had to sit down on the edge of his bed. The room seemed to tilt. "Big man, movie." She remembered him. In the terrifying whirlwind of her life being upended, his was the face she recalled. His was the presence she associated with safety. Maria continued, her tone shifting, becoming more thoughtful, more probing. "You seem to have a real connection with her last night. It's rare. She hasn't said a word to anyone else. She just hides behind her bunny." Brian could only nod mutely, the phone pressed hard against his ear. "Yeah," he finally managed, his voice rough with emotion. "Yeah, she's something else." Then came the question, the one that hung in the static-filled silence between them, shimmering with terrifying, incredible, life-altering possibility. Maria asked it softly, almost casually, but it landed in the center of Brian's chest with the force of a physical blow. "Officer Zach, given that, and given the severe circumstances of her case, and our critical shortage of emergency homes, would you ever consider being a placement for her?" The question echoed in the silence of his Spartan bedroom. Would you consider being placement for her? Become a foster parent to this deeply traumatized, physically injured, emotionally shattered little girl? His life was his job. His home was a bachelor pad with a fridge that held beer and leftover pizza. His days off were for sleeping in and watching sports. He had no family in town, no experience with kids. It was insane. It was impossible. It was terrifying. But his heart, which had been irrevocably commandeered in a police station interview room, answered before his brain could compile the exhaustive list of logical, rational reasons why it was a catastrophic idea. "Yes," he said, the word leaving his lips with a certainty that felt like destiny. It was the easiest, hardest, most right decision he had ever made. Yes. What do I need to do? What followed was a whirlwind, a blur of frantic, purposeful activity that made the next 3 days feel like a single long breath. A blizzard of paperwork that he filled out with a fervent dedication he usually reserved for felony reports. Surprise home inspections from a licensing worker, during which he frantically hid laundry and bought a fire extinguisher. Background checks that he willed to process faster, 100 phone calls. The system, usually known for its glacial pace, seemed to move with a strange and urgent momentum. Everyone who had been involved in the case, from the detectives who had interviewed the adults to the DCS workers who had seen Kyla's injuries, had also seen the way she looked at him and the way he looked at her. They had all witnessed the silent communion over a cartoon movie. They all quietly, determinedly worked to make it happen. He had met her on a Saturday night. By Wednesday it was all arranged. Wednesday evening, as the sun once again began to set over Kingman, a familiar DCS sedan pulled into his driveway. Brian stood on his front porch, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He was in civilian clothes, jeans and a t-shirt, and he felt naked without his uniform, vulnerable. He was waiting for the most important arrival of his life. Maria got out of the car and gave him a small, encouraging smile. Then she opened the back door, and there was Kyla. She was wearing a clean but slightly too big donated dress with ducks on it. She still clutched her ragged, one-eyed bunny. She looked up at him, then at the unfamiliar house, her one good eye wide with a mixture of fear and curiosity. "Hey kiddo," Brian said, his voice soft, kneeling down on the driveway just as he had in that apartment. "Welcome home." She didn't smile, but after a moment's hesitation, she let go of Maria's hand and took the one he offered. Her small fingers were warm and trusting in his. He walked her into the house, into her new life. The first few weeks and months were a delicate, exhausting, beautiful dance. There were midnight terrors, awful, silent screams that would tear through the house, where she would thrash but not make a sound, trapped in the prison of her own memories. She would flinch at sudden movements, especially from men. Meal times were a battle, her relationship with food fraught with anxiety. Brian learned patience on a level he never knew existed. He learned to move slowly, to announce his presence in a room. He learned to speak in calm, low tones. He filled his house with the sounds of Disney movies, Wreck-It Ralph playing on a near-constant loop. He learned to cook macaroni and cheese from a box, and to make peanut butter sandwiches with the crusts cut off. He bought her a beautiful new plush bunny, but he never ever tried to take away the old matted one, which he secretly named Sir Hopsalot. He learned to braid hair, his large, clumsy fingers fumbling comically with the tiny elastics, often resulting in lopsided, chaotic pigtails that Kyla would proudly wear all day. The breakthrough moments were small, often silent, but to Brian they were seismic victories. The first time she laughed at a cartoon, a real, genuine, unforced belly laugh that sounded like bells. The first time she ran to him when he came home from work, not hiding behind the couch, her small feet pounding on the tile yelling "Dada." The first time she crawled into his lap of her own volition, not for comfort from a nightmare, but just to be close, resting her head against his chest during a movie. The first time she called him Dada, not as a question but as a statement of fact. He was there for for the endless doctor's appointments, holding her hand as they documented the fading bruises, a living record of her past pain being slowly, miraculously erased by time and safety. He was there for her first day of preschool, watching her cling to her teacher's leg before finally, bravely letting go and walking into the room full of other children. He was there for every scraped knee, every bedtime story, every question about the world, every small, glorious victory over the shadows of her past. 2 years passed. The scared, silent, bruised little girl blossomed into a vibrant, chatty, energetic, and fiercely loving 4-year-old. The physical bruises were gone without a trace, replaced by the healthy, sun-kissed glow of a cherished and active child. The haunted, wary look in her eyes had been permanently replaced by a mischievous, joyful sparkle. The happy-go-lucky spirit he had glimpsed like a faint star in the darkness of that apartment was now the brilliant sun around which her personality orbited. And Brian was no longer just Officer Zach. He was his life, once defined by the singular, driven focus of his job, now revolved around tea parties, sidewalk chalk, bicycle training wheels, and the correct pronunciation of all the Disney princesses. His patrol car glove compartment held goldfish crackers and a spare sippy cup. His phone's camera roll was 1,000 pictures of a grinning little girl. He was more tired than he had ever been, and happier than he could have ever imagined. The final formal step was adoption. The court date was... It felt less like a legal formality and more like a celebration, a coronation of what they already were. They went to the store together and Kyla picked out her dress. A frilly, poofy, blindingly pink number she declared was the most beautifulest dress in the whole world. Brian bought a new dark suit and a tie that had a tiny, subtle pattern of cartoon characters on it just for her. The courtroom was full of their chosen family fellow officers who had become uncles, DCS workers like Maria, who had become grandmothers, friends from the neighborhood. Brian held Kyla's hand just as he had that first night. She swung their clasped hands back and forth, excited by the crowd, not fully understanding the gravity but feeling the love. The judge, a woman with intelligent eyes and a warm smile, asked Brian a series of formal questions. Did he understand the permanence and legal finality of this commitment? Did he promise to provide for her, to love her, to care for her, to protect her, in sickness and in health? His answers were a steady, unwavering yes, Your Honor, each one feeling like a vow more sacred than any he had ever taken. Then the judge turned her attention to the small figure in the big pink dress. "And young lady," she said, her voice kind, "do you know who this man is?" Kyla nodded, her curls bouncing. "That's my Dada. And do you want to live with your Dada forever and ever? Do you want him to be your daddy for always?" Kyla looked up at Brian, her face beaming with absolute certainty, then back at the judge and nodded vigorously. "Yes," she said, her small voice clear and confident in the hushed courtroom. "I love him forever times infinity." The judge's smile could have lit up the entire county. She signed the formal decree with a flourish, the pen scratching a period at the end of their long beginning. "The court is pleased to sign this final decree of adoption. Congratulations, she is officially and forever all yours." The sound of the gavel was the sweetest, most profound sound Brian had ever heard. It was a beginning, not an end. He swept Kyla up into his arms, spinning her around, her pink dress flaring out like a blossom. The courtroom erupted in applause and happy tears. He held her tight, burying his face in her hair, and felt a physical weight, one he hadn't even realized he was still carrying, lift from his shoulders and vanish into the air. This weight was lifted, he would explain later, struggling to find the word, because I knew finally and completely that I didn't have to worry about who was going to be taking care of her, who is going to be loving her, who is going to be there for her first day of school, her first heartbreak, her graduation, her wedding. It was going to be me. It was always going to be me, forever. The story of the cop and the kid had its fairy tale ending, the kind that isn't an ending at all but a glorious ongoing beginning. It's a story that proves family isn't a matter of biology, but a matter of the heart. It's built from choice, from courage, from compassion, and from the incredible transformative power of a simple loving gesture. It started with a call for service and ended with a lifetime of being called. She means everything, Brian says, his voice filled with a love that is as deep and as constant as the tides. Absolutely everything to me. She is my best thing.
And that everyone is the full, expansive, and deeply heartfelt true story of Officer Brian Zach and his daughter Kylie. It's a powerful, undeniable testament to the fact that even in the darkest of circumstances, light and love can not only persist but can grow to illuminate entire lives. Finding, researching, and sharing these authentic, soul-stirring true stories is the very core and passion of this channel Beyond the Bias. It is genuinely incredibly challenging to find narratives that cut through the cynicism of the world and reveal such profound, life-affirming goodness. But stories like this are the reason I spend countless hours searching for them. They are our reminders. They are our compass. If this story touched your heart, if it reaffirmed your belief in the power of connection and the beauty of second chances, then your support would mean the absolute world to me. It would fuel me. It would motivate me to keep digging, to keep sharing these beams of light in a sometimes dark world. Please, if you feel so moved, hit that subscribe button and share this video far and wide. Let's spread this reminder of hope, love, and going beyond the bias together. Thank you, from the bottom of my heart, for watching. Until next time.